reel on my social media account a couple of weeks ago alluding to the size of my physical TBR that doesn't fit on my bookshelves. And today I'm going to be talking about those books in more detail. To give you an idea of my reading tastes and the books I'm going to be hopefully picking up in the next year, maybe two, because it is that size, I am going to share with you the books that make up the physical TBR that don't fit on my bookshelves, talk about the genres I'm going to be picking up, and going through some of those books, pulling out why I am interested to read them, and generally talking about the genres that appear on the list. Now, as a big fantasy reader, you would probably think fantasy is going to make up the bulk of this video. But I was actually quite shocked when going through and prepping for this video to find that fantasy is by far not the biggest genre in this pile of books. I'm going to keep that a little bit of a secret for now, and I'm going to unveil that as we go through. So I'm going to start with some of the smaller categories on the list so you can get a feel for some of the odd genres I'm going to try first, but then lean further into the books I have a lot more of later down the video. Stay tuned, find out what I'm going to be reading, and see if you overlap with your bookshelves with mine. Starting with, I suppose, the most kind of niche books in this stack, I have a couple of books that they don't really fit necessarily in a genre together, but they don't fit in any of the genres that I've kind of categorized either. They're a little bit unusual. They are books for me to try, really, and see if I like them. The first is a manga, and that is Death Note. Now, I've enjoyed reading mangas before, and Death Note's been on my list because I've heard that it's a particularly good one. So it took me a while, actually, to find a copy of this. It always seemed to be sold out of my local bookstores. But I found one, it's on the list, and I can't wait to give this a try. And obviously, if I get on with this, then I'll be picking up the rest of the series, because this is literally just the first one. Next on the list, and kind of lumped in with this one, because I suppose it's not particularly a conventional book in a way, is Assassin's Creed Renaissance. Now, I've lumped this in here because it kind of stands on its own. This is a book which actually kind of is almost like a fan fiction of a game that's been made. And I really love this game. In particular, I love this character. So whilst I would try out more if it reads well, I bought this one specifically because it targets my favourite storyline in the game as a whole. Now, I have heard that this book reads a little bit procedurally, I suppose, and that's kind of how the game runs, I suppose, so maybe it's a limitation based on that. But basically, I got this to try. I love Ezio, I love the Assassin's Creed game franchise as a whole. I haven't played some of the later ones, but the Ezio storyline, definitely my favourite, although not the last one, and quite like Black Flag as well. Black Flag was a good one. So anyway, this is a little bit different. So I picked it up to try when I found a copy when I went to Liverpool shopping. Probably a couple of years ago now. These next two books are easier to categorise because they both fall into like Greek mythology, and they are Psyche and Eros, and then we have Herc. Now, I enjoy Greek mythology, so I've definitely picked these up because of that love. And also, like, I feel like they've been talked about in the wider book community before. So definitely influence there as to why I've physically picked these up. Unfortunately, I just haven't physically picked them up to read yet. So it's definitely my intention in terms of, getting through these, seeing if I like them, and probably reading more of the genre if I do. Now, I have not found particularly a Greek mythology I don't like. I'd say there's one neutral one, which was maybe a little bit controversial, in that I didn't enjoy Circe as much as everybody else does. But it was fine. Had its ups, had its downs. So anyway, I have a couple of Greek mythologies to pick up. So they will be coming up on the list in the near future. The next set of books on my list are broadly categorised together under fiction, but I'm going to split them out a little bit as I show them to you based on kind of their leaning. So I have one dystopian fiction to pick up, and it's a book I've already talked about. Oops, dropped one. The first book is a dystopian fiction which I've already talked about earlier this year because I intended to read it in tandem with 1984 by George Orwell. That is a retelling of that same story written from the perspective of Julia. Now, I didn't ultimately get to read this in tandem, but because I've already had this on an earlier TBR this year, I would like to prioritise this book. It is actually also on my fixed TBR I've set myself for this year to pick up in 2026. So this is a book you're going to see hopefully very shortly. I hope you're as excited for me to pick up this one as I am. The next two books are, I suppose, contemporary fiction. I don't know how else to categorise these. I can't remember where I picked this one up. I can't remember if someone gave this to me. Or if I just like the sound of it and like a charity shop type job. So anyway, we have everything. I don't really know a whole lot about this one, so this one's going to be a bit of a surprise. This one, however, is a book I am more familiar with in terms of its storyline, I suppose. I think this one is also on my fixed TBR list. I'll go and double check. But it's certainly a book I have read a lot about and read good things. So A Man Called Ove is definitely a book I want to get to this year. It's also not too chunky, which feels like something I kind of need right now. The last three books falling into this broader kind of fiction category have some kind of historical leaning, so I've been popping these together. These are The Templar Secret, Master and Commander, and Heather Morris has published Sisters Under the Rising Sun. So these are all books I have picked up because I have an interest in the underlying subject. So The Templar Secret, I guess the underlying motivation to read this actually comes from Assassin's Creed. So a little bit of a niche reason for why I'm picking this book up. But I've been fascinated kind of by the history of this particular group since playing the Assassin's Creed games and coming across them in kind of the very first games that came out. Beyond that, don't know much about this book. So it's going to be somewhat of a surprise, but I think I'm going to like it overall. Master and Commander obviously is going to have a seafaring leaning, which I really like the sound of. But it's also set kind of in the broader historical time period of, is it the French Revolution or is it the First World War? Hey Siri, who is Napoleon Bonaparte?
Napoleon Bonaparte, later known by his regnal name Napoleon I, was Emperor of the French from the 18th of May 1804 until his first abdication in 1814, with a brief restoration during the 100 Days in 1815. Do you want me to keep reading?
Yes, please.
He rose to prominence as a general during the French Revolution and led a series of military campaigns across Europe and the Middle East during the French Revolutionary and Napoleonic Wars. As a statesman, he implemented numerous legal and administrative reforms in France and Europe.
Thank you.
Of course.
There we go. French Revolution it is. So, I generally have an interest in history anyway, and that is going to become very apparent later in this video. But given that it's got this kind of leaning and maybe a slightly different setting, I'm looking forward to getting to this one. Finally, Sisters Under the Rising Sun. Heather Morris has a place in my heart because I've absolutely loved her Tattooist of Auschwitz series. So I am looking forward to trying something along the same lines but a little bit different in terms of its setting. Now, this one is also kind of set in a prisoner of war camp, but I don't think it's set in Germany. No, it looks like... Is this set in Singapore? Possibly. Yeah, I think it looks to be set in the kind of East Asian countries anyway. So it's a very different setting. but similar in terms of its time period. So it is a broadening of scope, I suppose, on what I've traditionally read in terms of historical fiction. And I love Heather Morris's writing, so this is pretty much going to be a safe bet. The next set of books are kind of broadly more characterised under, I suppose, like mystery, thriller, horror, suspense kind of genres, in order to get these to come together. And the stacks are starting to get a little bit bigger now. So, firstly, we have Think Twice by Harlan Coben. I haven't tried any of his books yet. There's been a lot kind of about Harlan Coben kind of doing the rounds lately, whether that's through Book Talk, but also there's been a few like TV series made based on books and stuff. So I picked this up to give their writing a try. Next, we have The Examiner by Janice Hallett. Now, this is an author I have read books from before, in particular The Appeal. Especially now, this I believe follows a similar format. Yes, it does, where kind of books are written in like a mixed media format. So, not only do I enjoy the genre as a whole, but it would be nice to read something that isn't kind of traditional prose. Next is a book I had also hoped to get to last month. It came out of my TBR jar, but unfortunately I didn't quite get to it. It's also not a small book, and that is Sleeping Beauties by Stephen King and his son Owen King. Now, I like the feminist leaning behind this book, whereby something impacts all bar one woman, I believe, where they fall into a deep sleep. If they're disturbed, they almost become like feral monster type things. But there's one particular woman that just hasn't been impacted by this at all. So there is a mystery element that I'm keen to delve into as to why. But obviously, being Stephen King, there's going to be some kind of like horror elements to perhaps the other characters who have been impacted. So looking forward to getting around to trying this one. I've had it that long that the spine has actually faded in the sun on my bookshelves. So this was on my bookshelf. It's come off my bookshelf because I was meant to read it and hasn't made it back on. So like Julia by 1984, this is included in this list because it's meant to be prioritised as a read. Another Stephen King installment is Under the Dome. Now I believe, found a copy of this book on like one of the like charity bookshelves in a Tesco store nearby. And this had been on the television around about the time, and I happened to spot it afterwards. So it is a donated copy. It's not the nicest looking copy in the world, but I mean, it could be worse. So I picked this up purely because people were talking about the TV series and talking about how much they enjoyed it, how, you know, maybe a bit strange and bizarre it was. And generally, I like Stephen King anyway. So here's to another epic from him coming up in the near future. And lastly, another Stephen King, although this one I would say I got much more recently, is Never Flinch. Now, I picked up a copy of this in September last year. Like Catabasis by R.F. Kuang, I picked this up going on holiday, not coming back off holiday or anything. I picked it up in my local airport and took it all the way and then brought it all the way back with no intention of reading it. But it was just because I love Stephen King. It's also got a really intriguing cover, and yeah, beyond that, I don't know what else is in this, but Stephen King's an auto buy at this point. So yes, another book of his I'll be getting to shortly. Right, now we're getting into the chunkier categories, so bear with me while I go and get the next one. Oh, right. This is the fantasy stack, which probably wouldn't surprise you, but maybe it should surprise you that this is not the biggest, by far. So, we have quite a mix in here, so let's just go through. I'll try and go through logically. I'll tell you what. I suppose it makes the most sense to talk to you about two that come together. Those are The Great Hunt and The Dragon Reborn, which are books 2 and 3 of Robert Jordan's The Wheel of Time series. Now, I've had The Great Hunt I've probably owned it for a couple of years. Again, this was also on a TBR. Is it my May TBR? Might have been my May TBR. I'll find a link anyway. But basically I didn't get to it, so again, it's off my bookshelves and falls into this list. But I actually picked up a copy of The Dragon Reborn earlier this week. I found a copy that's in a pretty good nick in a local charity shop, and it cost me whole £2.50. So I thought it would be rude not to take advantage. There was a book 4 copy there that wasn't in as good a nick by quite a long way, so I left that one. But I have books 2 and 3 of The Wheel of Time to crack on with. Another book that was on my bookshelves that I intended to read and didn't then quite get to is The Dragon Republic by R.F. Kuang. This is the second book of her series The Poppy War, and I intended actually, I think, to get to this towards the end of last year, and it's dense enough fantasy in terms of page count, but they're also not the easiest in terms of content to read, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean, there's a lot of horrible things going on, there's a lot of dense history and stuff going on here that it's the sort of fantasy you need to take your time with. So that's not a criticism by any stretch of the imagination. But I just didn't get to this one, but I would like to soon. So that's making this book on this list and part of the stack to basically prioritize, because I need to get through a lot of this physical list. As I've said, it doesn't fit on my bookshelves right now. So I need to get reading. Another fantasy I actually picked up earlier this week in that same charity shop as I picked up The Dragon Reborn. I picked up The Great Wen. Now, this was purely because I like the sound of the book. It also only cost me £1, which is a win, and the British Red Cross have benefited from that donation. But I really just like the sound of the synopsis, and it was like a book about a book kind of thing, which is good for the Goodreads Spring Challenge if you wanted to pick that up, because, well, mind you, I don't know if it qualifies. But that's one of the kind of broader categories. So if you're kind of doing your own spin on that, this book would apply. This book is effectively, there's a presence of a book that's supposed to belong in another fiction book that's in reality, if you know what I mean. So I just like the idea. It sounds sort of based in, like, you know, the kind of like gritty understreets of London type thing. So thought it was going to be interesting. Nice short fiction, nice copy of it as well. So good find. Next on the list is a book I picked up a few years ago as part of a decent sized haul I did when I went over to Liverpool and basically went mad in a massive Waterstone store, because we don't really have that here. And I think I picked this up because of its kind of Eastern inspired fantasy rather than typical Western, which I tend to read more of, but not on purpose, if you like. So I picked this up as a conscious means of trying some different books, basically. And I love the idea of this one. So pure vibes, but hopefully I can get to this one soon. There we go. Let's get rid of that. A very pretty spread edge fantasy book I have basically appealed to me based on the title, as a person who really enjoys language and English and all that kind of literature stuff, and in particular language. Like, I wanted to go down that kind of route as a profession, you know, when I left school. Ended up going the complete opposite way, but that's besides the point. And obviously dragons, love my fantasy, so shouldn't really surprise you why this book is on the list. And also, it's just very pretty, okay? I love it. So, yeah, another vibe pick, if I'm entirely honest. But on the synopsis, I really like the sound of this one, so no doubt I will be getting to it in the near future. Finally, this one's a bit of a stretch for me because I am trying Sarah J. Maas as a whole, but I believe this series is a lot more romancy than Throne of Glass. So depending on how I get on with that series, I am probably going to try ACOTAR. I don't know if it's going to be my cup of tea though. I'm just going to put that out there right now. I did pick this up, I think also as kind of like a charity shop kind of acquisition, so I certainly didn't pay full price for it because I didn't know if I was going to like it or not. But never say never. I'll give it a go, see what I think. Right, this last category, friends, I've had to break down into 3 subcategories. Because I have a lot of non-fiction on my list. So I suppose really the biggest stack, which I've even got sat on my knee, like this isn't all of it. Bear with me while I try to get it all on display. There we go. This is just 1 stack out of 3. So this is my general non-fiction, I suppose. There's a memoir in there. Let's just kind of go through and try and break these down a little bit. Okay, so I suppose really we can say these first 4 are kind of like self-help, I suppose. Like personal development style books. That is How to Change Your Life in 7 Days by Paul McKenna. We have This Book May Save Your Life by Dr. Karam Rajan. You've probably seen him all over social media, which is how I came to learn that that book was a thing. Matt Haig's Reasons to Stay Alive, which I picked up after I read, what's the other one called? What's his other book called? I'll have to pop in a picture thingy, but it's one I read earlier this year. And then I picked up this book after reading Surrounded by Idiots, which I read a couple of years ago. Or probably listened to, I think, a couple of years ago. So, a few different books on kind of like self-helpy professional development topics there. I have 1 memoir, which is Margaret Atwood's memoir of sorts, according to the cover there. So, I think I got this for Christmas. Yeah, pretty sure I got this from my sister and her partner for Christmas. So, but I love Margaret Atwood. I love her writing. Want to read more, so obviously her memoir is going to appeal to me as well. What else have we got? I suppose the next stack, I suppose. I put these together on these, which they're kind of like more like commentary about current events, society, that sort of thing. So we've got Cybercrime in the Dark Net, Revealing the Hidden Underworld of the Internet. We have Supremacy, AI, ChatGPT, and the Race That Will Change the World. I believe that's about like commercializing the access to AI and stuff like that by Microsoft and Google. I talked about that recently on my blog, actually. And then finally we have Vulture Capitalism. Obviously to do with like corporate greed and all that kind of fun stuff. So I've lumped those together as kind of a category, but I quite enjoy reading books like of that ilk. So no doubt I'll be talking about these soon as well. We also have the 20-something treatment, which I forgot to mention before. I had a bit of a disaster trying to set up for this one, so bear with. So yeah, this one's more to do with, I think, like over-diagnosis of things compared to like similar generations years ago, and that sort of thing. Like, is it because there's something wrong, or is it because they're not addressing a problem, sort of thing. So quite intrigued. And then this one's only Diddy. This one's cute. So basically, my partner and I went to Iceland on holiday, and this is a book all of like about its volcanoes and stuff like that. So not a particularly difficult read, but like it is one I want to get to. So it's cute. I feel like it wasn't cheap either, but nothing in Iceland is cheap. So, but it's a good little memento from our holiday. I fairly recently picked this up as a charity shop acquisition. This was after there was something recently about David Attenborough's 100th birthday or something. Was it his 100th birthday? It was a special birthday anyway, I'm sure. Pretty sure it was his 100th. But anyway, I happened to spot this on a bookshelf shortly after that, and Like, I watched a documentary that was put out in celebration of that, that talked about the things he's done and that sort of thing, and then found a book that's kind of along the same ilk, so obviously picked it up. This one's a little bit of an unusual acquisition, in that the guy who wrote it actually came and did like a talk locally a couple of years ago, I believe, and did like almost like a tour of the night sky type. Yeah, I suppose it was like a talk more than anything. But he's also published a book about like the stars and the constellations and how to get into stargazing and stuff, so obviously bought one. You know me. It's also signed. This one is a non-fiction, but generally just kind of more for fun reads than anything. I suppose it is a memoir. Could have got lumped in with Margaret Atwood's, but yeah. So yeah, this is Super Vet, in case you don't recognise the name or the picture. Thought it'd be interesting. Picked it up. What more can I say? Next, we've got a couple of how-to books. First is How the Brain Works, and then the other one is How Psychology Works. Now, I picked these up because I actually really enjoyed psychology when I was doing my A-levels. So they are topics I have an interest in, and generally, like, I think the books are quite nicely laid out in that they're very factual. So, like, if I'm in the mood for something more intellectual to read, like, I can, but also, like, it's not too overwhelming. So really pick these up to kind of lean into a different type of reading if I'm really in that kind of mood. After watching the TV series finally, I've got a book companion for Planet Earth. Now, I really loved that documentary on television, so I definitely wanted to follow up with the book, especially when you've got like stunning imagery and stuff in between like this. I love anything like Earth program based, especially David Attenborough as well. But generally, like, I just love learning about stuff like that, seeing completely different sides of the Earth that we don't appreciate most of the time. So yeah, got the companion book to go with it, and thought that made sense. Can't wait to pick it up. So those are just the kind of more general non-fiction, but as you can see, I've got some more over there. They're the ones we've just gone through. So I have a lot still to go through. Well, I say a lot. We've got two subcategories. We're probably going to be here another 10 minutes or so. Now I've split these down because we are now, all the books left are historical or like non-fiction with history as kind of the underlying subject. But I've then had to subsequently further break that down specifically for World War II fiction because I have a lot of that. World War II non-fiction, sorry. So let's initially do the non-World War II, which is the bigger of the two stacks. But obviously these are kind of more broadly categorised in terms of the underlying topic. So let me try. Split out now. On its lonesome, we have a book particularly about the Mercian Kingdom that used to sort of mainly dominate the kind of central England. Now, I've read a lot of historical fiction based in Mercia, so I picked this up because I wanted to kind of get the actual facts behind those stories. Next, we have a couple of Viking-based books. The first of those is 24 Hours in a Viking World, which I believe takes you like through the average working day of a Viking. And then we have River Kings, which is kind of more, it is Viking, but more based around like Vikings journeying into the East and, kind of like the Middle East spice trade, that sort of thing. Silk Road, that's the word I was looking for. Which isn't your typical story you hear about from Vikings, so that's why I picked this up. Then a book I picked up because somebody at work read it and really enjoyed it. This is based on Roman history and essentially to do with a lot of murder and that sort of thing. So a bit standalone in terms of its topic, I guess, on my reading list, but I've had good reviews and I've had a good recommendation from someone I know. Next is a book I have been trying to get to for a good few months now, and that is Eve by Kat Bohannon. Now, this is history, and that it's to do with the evolution of humanity and the influence kind of like the female body has had on that in helping people thrive. So this is also on my fixed 2026 TBR, so it's definitely a book to prioritise. So the next few really are kind of more broadly able to be categorised in terms of like early civilization. And in The Earth Transformed, it's, I think, about how the environment of the planet has shaped civilization, if you like. So we have Assyria, the rise and fall of the world's first empire. That's getting a bit precarious. We have Fall of Civilizations. I believe this is written by someone who also does a podcast, but I've never listened to the podcast, but I just like the sound of the general topic. So, from the Colosseum of Rome to the crumbling suburbs of Detroit, the fine with temples to the Maya, of the Maya to like Bakhmut and Gaza. Yes, it was generally a more broad commentary on why civilizations rise and fall, which is cool. And then this one, this is why I believe like how Earth impacts civilizations as a whole, as I've already kind of mentioned. Okay, my last two in this category, we have Catherine de Medici, again, who is a figure from history I'm interested in based on the Assassin's Creed games. The Medici family play a big part in the Ezio storyline, and they're not particularly nice people, but in particular, Catherine is especially painted out to be not a nice character. So I picked up this book because I kind of wanted to learn the actual history behind that characterization. So beyond that, I don't know much more, but that's kind of the point. I want to learn. And then finally, we have The Muse of History, which I picked up just because I like the sound of it. This was also one of my Liverpool shopping spree picks. Yes, this is like Greek history. So a little bit different to the other books I've talked about so far. And then the final little stack of books is all World War II based. So this is unusual, but it's nice to broaden your horizons. Finally, we get to the Little World... Well, I say Little World War II stack. There's enough of a stack here. This is all World War II non-fiction. Most of it, I think, is to do with like lives in concentration camps of some description. So those three are more like individual experiences in concentration camps. So we have A Mother's Promise, we have Aftermath. Maybe that's not concentration camp, actually. No, that's more general. Ignore me. So I've got two concentration camps, which is A Mother's Promise and A Delayed Life. So Dieter Kraus looked after like a little hidden library in Auschwitz, I believe. She becomes a secret library. Secret librarian of a secret library. You know what I mean. We'll include Aftermath in there. We have Come to This Court and Cry, which is about secrets coming out in the Nazi trials. I want to say Nuremberg. Is it necessarily Nuremberg? No. So it's about court trials of Nazi war crimes. We have Hitler, Stalin, Mum and Dad, which is Memoir of Survival. And then finally, The Traitor Circle. I have a lurgy and I've got a cough, so I'm amazed I did that well to last that long. So those are the unread books that don't fit on my bookshelves. Now we've already talked about around 53 books there, so there's a lot I already have to get to. That obviously doesn't include the unread books that actually do fit on my bookshelves, of which I have plenty more. I also have a pretty extensive Kindle library, which maybe we can look at some point, if that's the sort of thing that interests you. But really my priority right now is to try and get through some of these books so then I can either decide if I want to keep them, find a permanent home for them, or if once I've read them I'm content with that experience and then I can donate them on to charity or rehome them in some other way. Have you read any of the books I feature today? If so, I would love to hear your thoughts, whether you think I should prioritise them or not, or if you are interested in any of the topics I've touched on with today's books. Until my next video, I hope to see you again soon. Bye for now.